Welcome. This is the Enlightenment Show, and I'm your host, Laurie Schoenfeld. This is where Chicken Soup for the Soul meets the artist way with Nancy Drew. Our guest today is Sarah-Ruiz Grossman, author of A Fire So Wild. We're going to be chatting with her today all about her new release and a time in her life when a fire left a scar. Hello, Sarah. Welcome.
Hi, Lori. Great to be here.
I am so excited to have you here and be chatting about this beautiful book that has so many wonderful conversation pieces in it.
Thank you.
You are so welcome. It is March. What would you say? Almost March. My brain is in March. It's almost March. What would you say is a lucky charm for you in your life?
I'd say my dog. I have a pit bull who's a rescue, and he, accompanies me through all the ups and downs of life, and pets are a gift, so I'm lucky with them.
Yes, I have two, Sarah. So yes, I definitely feel the dog love in our home. They are just the companion that just holds your soul. This book, A Fire So Wild, I'm excited to talk about it because there's so many different pieces within it that opens up fantastic conversations that we definitely need to be having more of. Can you share with our listeners and viewers what A Fire So Wild is all about?
Yeah, of course. So A Fire So Wild is about a wildfire that approaches Berkeley, California, and three families whose lives intertwine as the heat and smoke descend upon the city. And we follow a couple up in the hills who are more well off, a father and his daughter in affordable housing in the flats, and a couple out of their van near the shore. And we see the cracks in the lives that they built and the injustices that are lying under the city's surface.
Mm-hmm. One of your characters, Abigail, it's really important for her to make something of herself. Why is that?
Yeah, I think Abigail in particular, she's reaching middle age. She's about to turn 50. She has a wife who she's been in a long relationship with, a son who is in high school and about to go off to college. She works in affordable housing in a small nonprofit, and she's proud of all these elements. And yet she questions at this stage of her life what it all adds up to and if it's enough. And I think we all reach moments in our lives where we sort of take a step back and are forced to examine what are the ways that we've sort of moved through our lives, constructed ways of being that perhaps we have taken for granted, how far they've taken us, and whether this is still the path we want to be on.
Mm-hmm. I really appreciated, Sarah, that you brought in, as a 50-year-old woman, her sitting in this space of looking around her going, this is not what I thought my life would be like at this point. Because I think that's so relatable on our life path. As you mentioned, there's things that move and flow in the way we expected, but most of the time it's completely different. Mm-hmm. This book was inspired by your 6 years of you being a reporter at HuffPost, speaking to climate crisis in the Bay Area. Tell us about that.
Yeah, I was lucky enough to report for HuffPost on the climate crisis, the housing crisis, and how these intertwined in a special place like Bay, which is, California is a bit of a canary in the coal mine when it comes to the climate crisis. The wildfires and rising heat have been worsening in dramatic ways in recent years. And I was privileged to speak to survivors of fires in 2017 after the Sonoma and Napa fires, and in 2018 after the Paradise Fire, which tore through and wrecked the entire town. And it was in speaking with folks about, the experience of surviving fire these disasters, whether it's fires or floods, don't discriminate in who they impact as they come through. But the aftermath and the recovery really shows the cracks in our society and who we support and who is privileged enough to recover quickly and who we leave behind. And that's what I sought to examine in this novel.
Mm-hmm. I'm not going to give any spoiler alerts, but the last page, oh my God, the whole book was amazing. But the last page I read 3 times and just let it sit with me for a little bit in a way that I understood, but in ways that I didn't understand. It was absolutely remarkable. So anyone who is reading A Fire So Wild, will put the links down below at the end of the interview. Please really sit with the whole book, but make sure you really pay attention to that last page too, because it was very powerful.
Thank you for saying that. I appreciate it.
Mm-hmm. What would you say was the moment, Sarah, when you felt the most passionate that this book needed to be written and it was time for you to write it?
I mean, I was a kid who grew up in a house lucky enough to be surrounded by books, and books were a real haven for me in being a place to come to for company and for solace as I faced, loneliness, uncertainty, all the things that life brings our way and that we struggle to get through. And I had come to writing sort of in a roundabout way. I worked first in nonprofit communications and then as a journalist. But my dream of dreams was always, since I was a kid, to write a novel. And it was actually during the pandemic that I was first given permission. I was going to say I gave myself permission, but it was actually a friend of mine who gifted me The Artist's Way. And yeah.
I love The Artist's Way. Yeah.
Yeah, I do too. And it was a really important part of the origin story of this book. It was the pandemic. We were in isolation. I was not able to see my friends, but week after week, I was able to complete the passages of The Artist's Way in community with my friend. And at the end, it asks you to write down, what would you do if you weren't afraid? And I write a novel.
Oh, I just got chills because I also love The Artist's Way. So I understand the power in those prompts and the chapters and the questions. But how you just spoke to that last part of like, if you weren't afraid, what would you do? I'd write a novel. Yeah. You did it, Sarah.
Thank you.
Oh, man. And I really like how you said she gifted it to you because it is a treasure in many different forms. For sure.
100%.
Why was it important for you to write different perspectives on how your characters viewed the fires?
Yeah, I think, first of all, I think it's important, at least in my work, but I appreciate it also as a reader, in contemporary fiction, to show the breadth and depth and diversity of the world that we live in. And so that was really important to me when we're looking at something like the climate crisis, which affects so many different people of different walks of life quite differently because of how society is stratified by class, by race, gender, sexuality. And so it was really important to me, if I was going to tell this story right, to not just tell it through the perspective of one person from one background or one experience, but really, what is society made up of? What are the choices that we make and how we structure our society? And how does that affect the reality of the climate crisis that will affect all of us, but in very different ways? And do we want to face how we're complicit in the ways that we keep up the status quo that leaves some people particularly vulnerable and others able to scot by?
Mm-hmm. Let's dive into that a little bit too, of why do you feel that it is so important for people to understand and also educate themselves around that climate crisis?
Of course. I mean, as a resident of California, the climate crisis is around us. It is very present year after year. We feel it. I moved here from New York in 2017, and that very weekend of Labor Day weekend was a historic heat wave. And I arrived to the city of San Francisco, which was seeing degrees above 100 degrees Fahrenheit, which was unheard of at the time. And the infrastructure of the city was not prepared for it. So nobody has AC because you've never needed it before. And you're sitting in your apartment, it's sweltering. A couple weeks later, because of nearby fires, the air is now thick with ash. You can't open your windows because you don't want to let in this toxic air. But if you keep them shut, you're now in sweltering heat in shut apartment. And so this is the reality year after year in California. As a New Yorker, there's a way in which the community I came from sort of shuts its eyes to this issue. It's not something that affects them. And yet this past summer, I was in New York, and in June, the sky was blanketed orange, violently orange, apocalyptic photos of the city because of the Canada wildfires whose smoke and ash were drifting downward. And for the first time, I think people started to open their eyes to, oh, there's no sleepwalking through this. If it's not today, it will be us tomorrow. And so we better be paying attention to where it's already happening now and trying to do something about it.
Mm-hmm. Yes, the element of closing your eyes, which you address that in multiple spaces within your book, of it's not affecting me, so therefore I don't actually need to see.
Mm.
But it is ultimately. It's just easier to say it's not.
Yeah, soon enough. Every one of us.
Yes. What did you love most about writing and experiencing the process of going through this book?
So many things. I think the greatest gift was I was writing a book about Berkeley while I was living in Berkeley in the pandemic when we weren't socializing. And so my way of moving through my days was to go out in nature as much as possible. And I think it shows in the pages of the book. I completely fell in love with a regional park up in the Berkeley Hills called Tilden Park. And they're just miles and miles of trails, and there are birds, hawks and towhees. And I'm a total amateur when it comes to bird watching, but I became obsessed with these creatures. They were the only things that I was interacting with, and they became companions. And so that was, I think, such a gift in being able to write the novel from a place that I was living in, and to be able to imbue the passages with the nature that was giving me so much and that I know is under threat.
Mm-hmm. I was really hoping, Sarah, when I read that section about birds, I was like, I wonder how much of this is like fictionalized or really a part of her heart, because I love birds too. So I love hearing that that was a part of your heart.
They're the best. We're so lucky.
You love trees as well, as we kind of talked about a tad before the show. Why are they so important to you? What does trees and nature mean to you?
Trees in particular, if y'all haven't read the book, The Overstory by Richard Powers, I highly recommend it. And it traces all these different characters and their relationship to trees. And trees are ancient, wise beings that we are lucky to share the earth with, and have been, many of them, here long before we came. And I say we as in those of us who are living today, but many before the societies that we are among. And they are both guardians of this earth and creators of the air that we breathe and keep it clean, of shading and allowing other vegetation to thrive that our animals and our entire ecosystem depends on. So we are lucky to be sharing space with the trees, and we do not act in accordance with that, with how we treat them, with how our society, shaves them down and uses them for logging, raises ancient woods in order to make space for, fields and cities. And we have a lot to learn in terms of coexistence and in terms of sustaining a sharing of this planet rather than an extracting from it.
Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely. All the stories that trees can tell. I always think about that comment of like, there's so many stories and things they've seen and felt in their roots that we're not even paying attention to either.
Yeah.
When is the time in your life, Sarah, either physically or metaphorically, that a fire left a scar for you?
Yeah, I guess I'll speak quite directly to my experience speaking with survivors of fire. After the Paradise Fire, I went up to the region months later. And so this is after the national media had sort of come and gone. This was after folks were able to register the immediate aftermath of losing their homes, having their entire lives disappear into ash. And we're now trying to figure out what to do next. And there's one couple in particular who inspired some of the characters in this book, who had been unhoused before the fire and who had to flee from their tent on foot. And by the time I met them, they were actually in a trailer. And that had been gifted by someone who was a good Samaritan who wanted to help folks in the community after the fires, but who by the time I met them 3 months later was asking them to leave and saying that they wanted their property back. And they had nowhere to go. And even in that circumstance, it was a couple, a man and a woman. And the man who had been collecting rocks as he went on his daily walks gifted me 2 of those rocks that I keep near my desk in my room. And he said to me, "Thank you for telling our story. Please take these with you." And I'll never be rid of those. Those rocks accompany me through all my writing, certainly through this book. But yeah, anything that we can share with one another from our sorrow and bring that into how we can make things perhaps easier for one another moving forward, how we can be with each other in the pain. Yeah, I think that's a scar I carry and that I feel privileged to have been shared with me.
I love how he gave you, like, those were important pieces to him. And gave him that part of himself to you.
Yeah.
That's beautiful. We're going to take it to the inner child question segment. Are you ready, Sarah?
Ready.
First question. As a kid, where was somewhere that you loved to explore?
I would say my high school English class. I was very lucky to have a teacher who, our room was set up in all our classrooms with a bunch of desks in a row facing forward towards the blackboard. And the first thing she would have us do when we walked in would be to turn all our tables and chairs into a circle toward each other. And it was a creative environment in which she wasn't there to impart knowledge. We were there to share with each other, and everyone's ideas was as good as the other person's. And so it was a really exploratory, fun, and meaningful way to engage with my peers and with books, and was, I think, the foundational place that I fell in love with books and with writing and what it can do and what it can bring, the community it can build as we talk about words and their power and the stories that we tell.
Mm-hmm. I love that so much. I haven't heard often of a teacher doing that, but that's powerful to do the circle vibe with your peers. That is really magical.
Yeah, it is. We're so lucky with our teachers. There are a couple teachers in this book. Educators are a gift, and we don't pay them nearly enough.
No. Second question. When you were a senior in high school, what were you most passionate about?
I would say at the time I was a kid who'd been my entire life in one city and my entire schooling in one school. And I think I felt this deep moment of transition where I was going to be leaving the community that I knew really well and where I felt really comfortable and embarking on a new adventure in college, which is the case of two of our characters in this book. And I think what I was most passionate about was getting out of my comfort zone and releasing the identity that I had really strongly formed and that had shaped me, and allowing myself to become someone new, something that is really difficult because there's a lot of loss and a lot of grief in shedding old versions of yourself, but also a lot of excitement and novelty. So I think, the year as a senior is a moment of deep transition, and hopefully we spend our entire lives making and remaking ourselves in that way.
Mm-hmm. Third question, what is the oddest food combo that you've liked and tried, or you've just tried?
Gosh, the oddest. I mean, I will say I'm a bit of a sucker for like peanut butter with literally anything. And I have a dear friend whose child is around like 1.5 and is also a peanut butter fan. And the other day she handed me peanut butter on a celery stick. And you know what? Shockingly delicious, perfect. We'll have again.
I have not had peanut butter on a celery stick for a long time, but yeah, it works. It definitely works.
Yeah.
Got like the crunch and the creamy and the healthy part of it and the protein.
Right.
Before we end today, can you share with our listeners and viewers what living a creatively abundant life means to you?
Yeah, I love the way you phrase that question, because I think creative abundance is so much more than sitting down and doing your work. It's about how you move through your life. And the way that looks for me is really how to be in community with my loved ones, with my friends, as I think about living a creative life. So we give each other permission to be creative by not only showing each other how we live our own lives, but encouraging each other to do the things that we are hesitant to do, to take on the new projects, to really dedicate yourself to that side thing that really fills you up. And that's how this book was made. It was a friend who gifted me The Artist's Way. It was other friends who read early chapters and encouraged me to keep going. And it's the friends who continue to be with me on this journey as the ups and downs of publishing go. They're the source that I come back to fill my cup. And so, creative abundance is created in community.
Thank you so much for joining us today, Sarah. It has been an absolute pleasure chatting with you.
An honor. Thanks for speaking with me.
Where can our listeners and viewers find you if they have any questions for you after the show or would like to grab a Fire So Wild?
Of course. So everything's on my website, which is my full name, Sarah-Ruiz-Grossman.com. And you can also find me on Instagram under the same handle, @Sarah-Ruiz Grossman.
Perfect. And I'm going to show a picture. This is a fantastic book for book clubs. So if you are in a space of looking for a book, that would be a great conversation for a book club. A Fire So Wild is my pick. Thank you for joining us live, everyone. And remember, as you go about the rest of your week, to find the things that are working for you. You are the creator of your own story. What steps will you take next? Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, everyone. Have a beautiful day.
Thanks. Bye.